Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our town hall. My name is Arati Kreibich. I am running for Congress in New Jersey's 5th District, and I really appreciate you being here. We have 16 days to go to the election. We are very excited as to where we are with the campaign. It has incredible momentum, and we can't wait to cross the finish line and win on July 7th. And I'm here to answer any questions that you have. And we have with me today, as I do always, our campaign staffer. His name is Mike Marino. Mike, do you want to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about yourself as we wait for questions to roll in, and talk a little bit about what we're hoping to focus on today?
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for having me, RC. Yeah, and just like you said, I'm always here on the town halls, but it's nice to be on this side of the camera and spend some time with everyone. I am a campaign staffer. I came on right at the beginning of February, and I've been doing some campaign finance work and organizing some of our volunteers. So really proud to be a part of it and excited for the discussion today.
Great. Well, I'm happy you're on this side as well. So this month has been incredibly eventful in many different ways. And I think even as the pandemic has started, the past few months have been incredibly eventful, incredibly stressful in so many different ways. One of the most moving parts of this month, what we've been doing over the past few weeks, so many of us have joined rallies and protests for Black Lives Matter to make sure that we're coming together to condemn police brutality and systemic racism and the systems that bring about and uphold inequities across the communities, across particularly Black communities, but across the various different sectors, so across housing, police, education. It really permeates everything that we have. And many of us have tried to elevate stories about brutality that are also faced by Black transgender women. Supporters of the LGBTQ plus community and Black Lives Matter movements have marched in the streets together. It's particularly, and joined causes, which is particularly poignant because June is Pride Month. And I think elevating voices, elevating stories about Black transgender women is particularly important today. We know that Black transgender women are murdered at alarming rates. We know that they have historically a bleak life expectancy of between 35 and 37 years old. On average, they receive an annual income of $10,000, which is well below the poverty line, and that their voices and their stories have been diminished, have been dehumanized. So far this year, at least 15 transgender people have been murdered. Majority of them tend to be Black transgender women. And these we know are underreported statistics. So I'm grappling with the kinds of things that we need to be doing to elevate stories, to make sure that we're centering around vulnerable communities, particularly Black communities, particularly the intersection of the LGBTQ plus community and the Black community. And I'm also grappling with the kinds of policies that are important right now, even with the meager victories, and in some ways, really important victories like the Supreme Court decision recently. And it feels as if, we're not doing enough, and that we have a long ways to go. And I'd love to hear, Mike, your thoughts on where you think we are and the kinds of things we need to do.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I love that you pointed that out, that in this moment nationally, we're having this really important conversation about Black lives, and then a really important intersection, this being Pride Month. And thank you for elevating the story and the needs of my Black trans sisters. I would just like to add from my own experience as a queer person working on this campaign, it means so much to me to be employed, on a campaign that values equality and diversity in the platform that you've put forward, but also just the fact that we live those values in our workspace every single day. It's not just about policy, it's about living them every day. And I'm proud that I can be my authentic self. I'm proud that I have so many queer coworkers who offer their perspectives and their experiences. And I think the thing I'm most proud of is when I get to organize our cohort of powerful young volunteers. From the moment I introduce them to the team, I can model for them an environment where queer people are authentically valued and respected. And that comes all the way from the top of the chain of command. So that's been my experience. And yeah, I just reviewed your LGBTQ plus platform on your website. And, I was really happy to see that you pointed out that mental health care is medically necessary, gender affirming healthcare is medically necessary. And, your vision for Medicare for all would definitely include that kind of healthcare. And yeah, I did think it was very interesting, your support for the Equality Act, which still has not passed. But I think some of the things we're trying to achieve in that, we got a little bit of a victory with the recent Supreme Court decision, Bostic versus Clayton County. But as I understand, we still have a long way to go, and the Equality Act would help get us there.
Mike, thank you. I appreciate that. And you are a great role model for our team, as you well know. I will say that, we talk about the recent Supreme Court decision, and it feels as if you, as a community, and tell me how you feel about this, but we shouldn't be waiting and hoping and praying for good Supreme Court decisions, right? To affirm humanity, to affirm what is written and what the country was built on. So for me, I think while this was great and while I celebrate the decision, I think we need to codify this with federal policies and federal laws. I think that, which is why I think we need to start with that Equality Act to be passed. I think we need to extend that, right, to other protections, including labor and housing. I think we need to definitely, when we're talking about Medicare for all, when we're talking about healthcare system, it is more important than ever that the LGBTQ plus community, and also vulnerable communities in addition, are able to access healthcare, are able to access mental health care in particular. And knowing the kinds of discriminations, knowing the kind of things that are still available when you look at employer discrimination, to have your healthcare tied with employment is particularly egregious and makes folks in the LGBTQ plus community, I think, particularly vulnerable and particularly minimized. So for me, I think that's why Medicare for all has such a strong significance. I also think that some of the other issues that we've talked about before, in addition to Medicare, in addition to mental health care, are LGBTQ plus youth homelessness. This is an important issue. We don't even have the right numbers to talk about the extent of what the issues are and how bad it is. But we know that this exists. We know that the majority of the homeless youth are LGBTQ. We know that the life expectancy, the outcomes for youth are really devastatingly awful. And if we actually pass the policies that we need to pass so that we can support our youth, so that we can actually help both in terms of social safety net, in terms of medical care, in terms of mental health care, I think we're going to go a long way towards improving our humanity at this point in our country. So I appreciate you being on. I would love to hear if we have any other questions related to Pride Month and related to LGBTQ issues, or anything else that you all have who are here, who are listening, and who are part of it. I will also say that as we're going into it, one of the things that I grapple with as well, and I don't know if you feel similarly, Mike, about this, is that feel profoundly lucky and fortunate to be in a town, to be an elected official in a town that very proudly raises the pride flag, has been raising the pride flag for the past 3 years or so. In fact, we have 2 pride flag raisings in our town. But I know that not every community is like that. I know that not every community is able to express support in that way. I know that even within communities where we express support in this way, people are still targeted, and folks still feel unsafe and vulnerable. So while I see the new generation, while I'm really proud to have kids who understand inclusion and what that means at a level, I think, which a lot of adults don't. One example was my younger son when we were filling out the census, and we were going down the list of questions. One of the very first questions was about whether the household member, which gender they were, male or female. And spontaneously he said, well, this is the wrong question. Right? This is not how it should be written. And so while I'm proud about the fact that he is thinking in those terms, the fact is the question was written that way. The fact is we haven't taken enough strides to really be able to support, to really have true inclusion. And I wonder, Mike, how you feel about that. Do you feel that we have come a long way? Do you feel we have a lot more to go? And how can we best support from a community perspective?
I love that was your son's first reaction. That's a really great anecdote. You can't even begin to, respect and uplift someone as a member of your community if you can't even identify them properly. And for non-binary, genderqueer people to identify themselves properly, that's just the first step. I'll say that when you spoke about Glen Rock, your town, and how welcoming it is, and how diversity is so important there. My first visit to Glen Rock was to visit your home, and the first thing I noticed was the pride flag that you had on your flagpole, in addition to the American flag. And it's a symbol, right? I get to enjoy relative privilege, and I usually feel very safe in almost any community I'm in the United States. But the symbol matters because I know there is a risk to all queer people, even if it's not seen. And it just helps to know that as the culture is changing and improving, the few holdouts there that have negative opinions about queer people, or who have a propensity towards violence towards queer people, it helps me to know that as a community we're signaling to them, hey, this isn't welcome. You're in the minority if you still feel this way after as far as we've come. And even for someone like me with relative privilege, I still have a little feeling. I still am a little circumspect when I hold my boyfriend's hand in public. That that act of intimacy, it can never be truly innocent. It will always be a political act, no matter where I am. So the symbols like that, showing as a community that we value all people, they matter. And I'm proud that Glen Rock does that, and I'm proud that that's part of your campaign.
That was really powerful, Mike. The act of intimacy being a political symbol. The fact that we can do that, the fact that we have to, the fact that we hate that is a political symbol really is disheartening, and really tells me how far we have to go. It shouldn't be at the end of the day. So thank you for sharing that. When we talk about LGBTQ plus rights, particularly when we're talking about Black transgender women, I think we're also talking about police brutality, and in particular how it affects Black transgender women. The fact is that more than half of transgender people report that they're uncomfortable seeking police assistance, and more than a fifth have interacted with police, talk about police harassment, report that they have experienced, and a percentage of those report that they experience biased motivated assault by officers. I think that this is a very important piece of the police brutality issue that we don't talk about nearly enough, and that has to do with the stigma attached to talking about gender nonconformity, talking our discomfort with folks who are, as a community, with folks who are transgender. And I think part of that is really, just like you mentioned with the pride flag symbols, is actually making sure that we're normalizing these conversations. We're normalizing folks who are gender nonconforming, because that is normal, that is part of our spectrum. And to be able to speak about that in an authentic way, I think is really important. And to be able to speak about our friends who are transgender, who are nonconforming, to be able to not alienate them, not point them out as anything special in ways that really highlight differences, but rather include pronouns, rather include the way they would like, and educate ourselves in the way that we need to interact with folks and be able to normalize everything that we're talking about, I think is imperative. And I think it's on all of us to be able to educate ourselves and to be able to educate our community, starting with our family and our neighbors, and talk about why this is really important, particularly those of us who have more privilege than others. So.
Yeah, thank you for giving voice to that. It feels really daunting, the task of addressing the systemic problem of people, queer people, being victimized again by institutions that claim to protect and serve them. It's like, it's an additional wound, an additional injury. And it's daunting for me thinking about what are the policies we're going to put in place to, like, one day get to a place where queer people aren't, uncomfortable interacting with, criminal justice law enforcement. And I have more hope on the cultural and the social side. And I think you said exactly where it needs to start. We need to start having these conversations, letting people know that, hey, this is a normal thing that's happening that we need to discuss and we need to make change. And as long as we keep bringing it up, over time, less and less people hopefully will say, this is the first time I've heard about this, or I didn't know this was an issue. So that at least gives me hope.
Yeah, I think on the police brutality issue, I think some of the answers are similar to what we've been talking about in general, right? When we're talking about Black communities as well, we need to reimagine what public safety looks like. We need to reimagine the actual role of police. We need to demilitarize so that the culture of enforcement doesn't include, or the culture of trying to help a community doesn't include an armed police officer coming in when clearly that is not the response that is needed in a particular situation. And I think that can really only happen when we're reimagining what the role is of our community and what we need to do in terms of when somebody's having a mental health crisis. Do you automatically call an armed officer? No. We should have resources that we're able to share, social workers or other folks who can help intervene. And we should frankly have better preventive care, better mental health care, so that it doesn't get to that point. But even if it does, an armed officer is never a good answer to a crisis like that. And I think that when we talk about the kind of training that we give our police officers, I think there needs to be an equal or even greater emphasis on de-escalating in a true form, right? And that can only happen when police see members of the community as members of our community. So everybody, and that there isn't an idea that when they are called because somebody looks suspicious, and that it automatically goes to, well, that person does not belong in this particular neighborhood because of these biases that we have in our head. And I think talking about that, and particularly with with LGBTQ folks, with queer folks, I think being able to really have more education and more community, more education on the part of the police about what it means to be queer, why folks would be intimidated and afraid and distrustful of the police, and what they need to do to gain the trust, what they need to do to actually be able to protect all of our folks in our community. And I think that's important because the onus should be on the systems that we have of enforcement. So let's see if you have any questions, Mike.
We do actually have a question from Eric on the call.
Oh, great.
Yeah, Eric is in New Jersey 5. His question is on a different topic, but also really important. So I'll invite him, and I'll also display a slide. I'll invite him to ask his question.
Great.
Okay. Hi, Eric. Are you with me?
Hi, guys. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the call. Dr. Arati, I have a question about expungements in New Jersey for marijuana charges. And I saw on your website that you are for legalizing marijuana in New Jersey, and also
on social justice platform of ensuring that we are actually doing what we need to in terms of criminal justice reform. In New Jersey in particular, it will be on the ballot in November. So this will be part of what we all decide on as a state. I think the best thing we can do right now is advocate for the kinds of things that we would like. And part of that is educating folks, making sure that people understand why this is really important, making sure people understand why the criminal justice angle, why this is important for criminal justice reform, the fact that we have disproportionately more Black folks who are, who essentially bear the brunt of the burden here when they're caught with cannabis, while both white and Black communities have the same amount of use. It's the Black communities who face the criminalization aspect of it. And I think that this is an undue burden, as we all know. Clearly, we need expungement. Clearly, we need to legalize. And from a scientific perspective, in terms of legalization, we already know that in communities where we have medical marijuana use, for example, opioid use actually falls because a lot of folks use marijuana for pain. It's actually well known that it controls pain as well, if not better, than opioids. And we already know the scourge of opioid addiction, which has hit all of our communities across the board. And so from that perspective, it's obviously really important. And in terms of, for New Jersey, again, on a statewide level, what can be done? Advocacy, education, particularly in suburban areas, about why legalization of marijuana makes sense from all different perspectives, I think is really important. And talk to state legislature, talk to your assembly people, talk to your senators about why this is really important for your community, why this is really important for our state. I think that's very important. Obviously, my stances are on a federal level, but I think change begins, again, at the local level. And I think having that is really helpful when we're advocating for these things on a federal level. So thank you. Okay, great. We'll see if we have any other questions.
Okay, I don't have another question coming. I do have a comment coming in from Durkira.
Great.
And Durkira says, "Thank you for fighting the good fight," capital letters.
Well, thank you for your support. I really appreciate it. So before we end today, Mike, I really want to ask you, from your perspective, I'm putting you on the hot seat here. You didn't know I was going to ask you this question. I would love to hear from your perspective why you think our campaign is unique, why you think we are making a difference, and besides not sleeping so much, your plans for the next 16 days.
This is my first time working on a congressional campaign, and I am far from the only person on this campaign that will say that. I think the employment decisions that you've made and the way that you've built up our team of volunteers really reflects your values. It's been so rewarding to be part of a community of people that, you know, are politically engaged and we want to see change. But we're, you know, I'll speak for myself. We're not necessarily doing this, you know, as part of a career in the political realm. And I think when a lot of people look at political campaigns from the outside, it's easy to get cynical and, you know, to not trust the messaging. It's like, oh, sure, they say that, but, you know, to me, it's so rewarding just being with real people who believe in you and want to make a difference. And from what I know of your story, that's the whole reason you got into this political game too. It was just there was a need that had to get done, and somebody needed to step up, and you did that. So I'm sure you hear that from people every day, but you know, at least from my perspective, working on the campaign, that's something that inspires me to keep doing this.
Oh, that's great to hear. Thank you, Mike. This was not set up to be that kind of a question, but I appreciate it. I have to say that our answers are very similar in terms of what is inspiring and I think unique about our campaign is really that grassroots energy, right? And the supporters that we have. And you've heard me say this before, we have really the best supporters. The best folks who are working for us, so enthusiastic, so passionate, and really wanting to make a difference. And I think that is a huge part of the energy that comes from our campaign. We are truly people powered, and it's truly about representing the folks in our district, which is great. So we actually have a couple of new questions as well. I think they're coming in from Facebook. So great. Okay, so there's a question from Neil Varjasi. The question is, I'm a second-generation immigrant from India. Sometimes it's more difficult to have conversations about social issues like LGBTQ people with people such as uncles and aunties who are a little bit more socially conservative. Do you have any thoughts about how to continue the dialogue with family and friends who in the Indian American, Asian American community? Neil, I feel you. Agreed. It is very difficult. It has been. I think we're not unique in that. We have a lot of communities that are reluctant, especially immigrant communities that are reluctant to give voice, to acknowledge that, especially in modern days, that queer folk exist. The thing that gives me hope is the fact that India decriminalized homosexuality a few years ago. That talks about finally, right? And talks about the kind of forces that are changing there as well, and being able to share that here, I think is really important. For me personally, it's really just doubling down. It's talking about how this is normal. This is part of the human experience, making sure that when folks are saying things that are derogatory, that we speak up in multiple different ways and say, no, that's not right. No, you misunderstand. Here's what this is. I think that's really important. And I think what was actually very important, speaking from personal experience, is exposing my parents, the uncles and aunties that we're talking about in general, to our friends who are out. Not in terms of using them as props, but really, when we have friends who are queer, who interact with our family, when we talk about them, when we share their experiences, when we normalize, when we say their, boyfriend, their girlfriend, when we use the appropriate pronouns just in a normal course of being, that's normalizes everything that we're talking about. Anything that's helpful. It's also been helpful just from a South Asian Indian perspective is to talk about the rich cultural tradition of honoring queer folk in different ways in Indian society. And so for me, talking about that and asking questions about that and asking questions about why, depends again on your relationship with folks, but really about why people were afraid or what it is that they heard that they feel is not right. Where is that moral conviction coming from? And really coming back and saying, this is actually completely wrong. And here's why, folks are just normal and this is just the way life is, I think has been helpful. And I will say the more we talk about our friends, the more we talk about our community, the more we share pictures of weddings that are not a man and a woman, the more we talk about our friends, kids and our friends, I think the more we normalize it. There are also different groups that are out there. Actually, they see Rainbow Parents as one group on Facebook that I'm part of, that I like to look at, and they're great in terms of resources. They're great in terms of coming out and helping folks, and so we could take a look at that as well.
I love that question from Neil, and I think that's great advice. Just trying to help normalize queer people. So thanks for doing that. And I'll offer myself up to any of my friends or like close acquaintances. I don't mind if you want to bring me along to dinner, and if you need to expose some of your family members to queer people, I'm happy to be like a gentle influence. I am not opposed to using personal relationships for a social or political progressive goal. So yeah.
That is incredibly generous of Mike to do. It is not his emotional labor to do. So, Mike, related to that, do you feel comfortable sharing any experiences that you've had, sort of opening hearts and minds?
Yeah, actually, I'd be happy to. In my own family, my dear friend, my cousin, is married. She's one of the first cousins to get married, and she was the family's first exposure to same-sex wedding. And just for years, my cousin-in-law Kate, being around the family for years, they were engaged. They were high school sweethearts. They're perfect. It was just the tiniest little microaggression from my loving aunts and uncles, just getting stuck on calling Kate Lily's friend. When it's like, we know this is her girlfriend, and then later this is her fiance. Let's use the correct terminology. And I'm glad you highlighted that too. I do have an experience of being in a different culture where homosexuality is taboo, but making friends with a family and having a serious connection with a friend around my age and his parents, and just trying in conversation about the differences between our culture. Not coming out myself, but I had the opportunity to talk about my cousin and to talk about things in the abstract in American culture, and just give the opportunity for someone to ask questions, to be exposed to new ideas. I did that deliberately. It was with in the context of a relationship that means a lot to me, but I also did have a goal. I want to try to change somebody's mind, and yeah, I guess like you said, it is emotional labor. And I got to tell you, not every queer person can do that. They're not in a position where it's safe to advocate for ourselves. So, you encouraging straight allies, cis allies to advocate for queer people, it's definitely necessary, and it's definitely appreciated.
Well, I think it's stories like yours, Mike, and I've heard you talk about this before, and the incredible courage that it takes for you to be yourself. Right, and to feel comfortable being yourself, which makes it incumbent on the rest of us who have a little bit more privilege in that vein, to speak up, to be able to me that motivates me to be able to do that with the difficult conversations that I need to be having with folks in my own community. And I think that Neil, if you take anything away from this conversation, and hopefully just focusing on the fact that we have folks who find it really difficult, who find it unsafe at times to be their true authentic self in a community, in a country as rich as ours, in a community that is supposed to be as safe as possible for all of us. I think, hopefully that motivates you to go past that little bit of discomfort when we're talking. And I will say that it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to be one conversation, right? It's sort of the opposite of the microaggressions, I think, or the positive side of the microaggressions. You could also use them as, I can't come up with a name quite yet, but really just you keep pushing back against that, and you keep normalizing it. You keep saying the right pronouns. You keep saying girlfriend or boyfriend or fiance or husband or wife or spouse or partner, whatever it is that you need to, and you wear them down the other way. And I think every little bit helps.
Definitely an element of wearing people down with social progress.
Wearing people down the right way, I think, is always helpful.
Will on the call suggests micro normalizations. Oh, Daniel said micro affirmations. I love these.
Yes, that micro affirmations. I like that one. That is great. Thank you. Micro normalizations are also good. I think I like micro affirmations. I'm going to use that. There you go. I think that's a good corollary opposite to microaggressions. So we have one more question. I think it came from Facebook. It says, can you talk about the Black Lives Matter movement and initiatives like the George Floyd Justice and Policing Bill being presented to Congress, as well as the expansion of Youth Corps or AmeriCorps? So yes, I'm not sure who actually shared that question, but thank you for that question. We've been talking quite a bit about Black Lives Matter movement. We've been talking so much, over the past few weeks. I have attended a number of vigils, protests, rallies, marches, uplifting the Black Lives Matter movement. And it's been incredibly moving to see how many people have come out in affirmation, how many people have come out in support, in condemnation of police brutality, and how many people are coming out and saying, I need to learn more, I need to do more, we need to act. And particularly when we go to these rallies and marches and vigils, it's not just big cities, it's not just, it's also the small towns that we have in NJ5 that are holding these. And when you look out into the crowd, it's a multi-ethnic, multi-generational mix, usually led by our young people, which is incredible to see and to be a part of. So that gives me a lot of hope for changing the passion, the protest, the demands that we have as a community into actual action, so that we can reimagine police safety, so that we can public safety, so we can reimagine the role of police in our community, so that we can reimagine what it means to be safe, and to ensure that we are actually being that our communities are actually safe for everybody, particularly Black folks. For centuries, we've had systems built on systemic racism, and it's way past time that we dismantle them. The Justice and Policing Act, or the bill that has come up, I think is a good first step. I think it's an appropriate first response. We absolutely need to do things like banning chokeholds. I think that's a minimum. We absolutely need to substantially increase transparency in police reporting. That's, again, a minimum. That's something that shouldn't have to be legislated, but clearly we need to start somewhere, and that's exactly where we need to start. Also have a resolution condemning police brutality, condemning racial profiling. That was co-sponsored by Representative Ayanna Pressley. I think that at a minimum, we need every single person in Congress to sign that, to sign on to that, because statements make a difference. But we need to go beyond that. We need to make sure that we end qualified immunity, because our police officers should not be above the law. We've already seen what happens for centuries when they are not held accountable for their actions. We need to understand that it's not just a few bad apples, that it's systems that are set up in place that help augment the kinds of brutality that can occur. We need to understand that there is a systemic problem here, and we need to be able to dismantle that. We need to really, again, reimagine what we mean when we talk about safeguarding our communities. And we need to make things like adequate and appropriate mental health care central to that. We need to ensure appropriate housing for people. We need to ensure dismantling systems of education, of racism that are related to education, related to housing. We need to ensure that we are strengthening our social safety net across the board. But in terms of the bills related to policing, I think that they are a great first step. The Justice Policing Act, I think we need to go farther by ending qualified immunity. And I think that we need every single member of Congress to join in condemning police brutality and centering that as the problem that it is. So. Okay. Great. I don't know if you have any other questions, but if you do, please put them in now. And if we don't, we're looking to see if there are any others. All right. Well, it looks like we don't have any other questions, but I appreciate everybody who joined the phone call or joined our town hall today. Thank you so much for your comments, for your questions, for the new word we'll be using, micro affirmations. And Mike, special thanks to you for joining and sharing your story and being so brave and vulnerable, and for your support. I really appreciate it. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Happy to be here. Happy Pride, Black Lives Matter, and Happy Father's Day. Please say Happy Father's Day from me to your husband, Thomas.
I will. Happy Father's Day, Happy Pride, and 16 days to go till the election. So folks in NJ5, please, when you have your vote by mail ballot, make sure you circle in, make sure you vote for me, black pen, sign it, seal it, put it in the mailbox before July 7th. Let's get this done. So thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.